Thank you. So the panel is taking as its starting point the idea that kind of early visions of open access were about how web-based technologies could kind of free us all of our print standards and traditional publishing expectations, and the ways in which data is shared and that kind of stuff. Despite the success of open access so far, much of publishing is still kind of constrained by anonymous closed peer review, constrained by the limitations of the printed page. This is changing, as publishers will see, across the humanities and STEM disciplines are developing new and better ways to publish research and its underlying data. So to discuss these innovations, we will hear from three panelists from three different publishers. Firstly, we'll hear from Dr. Mónica Moniz, the publisher and program manager for research directions at Cambridge University Press and Assessment, and Mónica will be talking about the research directions model. Then we'll hear from Dr. Rebecca Grant, head of data and software publishing at F1000. Rebecca will be discussing F1000's approach to data publishing. And then finally, Dr. Damian Pattinson will speak about eLife's new approach to peer review and the publication process. So panelists will speak for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll have a conversation at the end. So if I can invite Mónica to the podium. And then Bear will help you with the transition. Yeah, okay. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Okay, so we'll start with a video. I'm duty bound to always show this video, but I hope that it also wakes you up a little bit because, you know, it's Friday afternoon and all of that. And then I'll explain a little bit the model. So if I click, I'll just click play space.
Can you grow a building? How do we prevent the next pandemic? How can we modernize agriculture to support a healthy environment, animals and people? Finding the answers to questions like these can change the world, but they require researchers from different disciplines to work together to find creative solutions. Introducing Research Directions, a question-led journal that pushes beyond the boundaries of traditional publishing. It all starts with a question or hypothesis. Questions are set by the journal editors, with input from people in the research community just like you. Academic researchers from around the world from different fields will come together to find the answers, speeding up delivery and fostering collaboration and knowledge sharing. This collaboration will help researchers from different subject communities to make remarkable interdisciplinary connections. A traditional journal gives credit to one or more authors. Research Directions will distribute credit more evenly by acknowledging everyone that has contributed their expertise. Unlike a traditional journal, Research Directions shows the evolution of a research project, giving visibility to the entire research journey as it progresses, allowing researchers to reveal the real-time, complex picture of the work. Authors will publish research that takes incremental steps to answering the question or hypothesis. The resulting published output is broken down into discrete parts: results, analysis, and impact. A traditional journal promotes the deceptive idea that all research is linear. Research Directions will reveal the true research process. Instead of submitting one fully formed research paper, authors will be encouraged to submit incremental pieces of results and analysis that contribute towards answering the question or hypothesis. This will open the possibility of one set of results to be analysed by multiple research groups in various ways, increasing its value. Finally, the impact paper will be a way to summarise what's been published in response to a question and identify how those outcomes can be used for the benefit of society. Each results analysis and impact paper will be a published, citable research item that is indexed and receives a DOI. Discover more about Research Directions today.
Here we go to, so credit at the end, very much there. So that's kind of the marketing way of explaining what the journal are. So let's get a little bit more into specifics and how it's different. First of all, I wanted to say that I'm gonna play in the back if you do. No, it has. First of all, it is a suite of journals. It's a program. So we've launched the first 3.
Welcome to this online webinar on the history of Russia and Ukraine, which is going to reflect on the historical context of the current war.
Presentation.
My name is Liz Friend-Smith, one of the history editors at Cambridge University Press. It is my very great pleasure to introduce you.
I do know all of these people, though. They're not part of my project. Okay, thank you so much for that. So yeah, so 3 of them were launched in September, and 2 more are going to be launched in January. And the hope is that we get about 12 journals by 2025. I'll talk a little bit about what the themes are and why they ended up being those after I go through the program. So how do I go? Yeah. So instead of having a scope of a journal, which is usually how a journal defines itself, the journals in research directions start with questions. So each year, each volume, first by the editors, and then hopefully it'll be something that the rest of the community can contribute to. They will submit questions, and a question works in 2 ways. They're calls for papers, so they set a theme for a collection of papers, but they're also a paper in themselves. So it has a question, it has a context to the question, references such as, like an editorial. And the reason why we thought we would do this was to kind of bring that setting of the questions, bringing that view a little bit outside of the same people doing setting those questions. So we know that it tends to be funders, we know it tends to be certain researchers that do that, but we wanted to democratize, I can't say that word today, but you know what I mean, make it more democratic, that setting of questions. So we do have a question on can you grow a building. That's from Biodesign, one of my favorite journals, I have to say. It's very sci-fi. And then we have questions of like, how do we prevent the next pandemic? That's more like in the area of One Health, which is another journal that we have. And Modernized Agriculture kind of actually spans those 2 journals. And then we encourage people to submit their research. And the reason why we broke it down to what I'm going to call bits of science or bits of research is that we wanted to, again, show the complexity of how research appears. So we all know here that we are often encouraged to submit a paper that kind of tells a very beautiful story and a very linear story. I started with a question. I've done this whole set of results. They all worked beautifully, and then we got this product at the end. And everyone here, I guess even the public, knows that that's not how science works. So. But the truth is we discourage things like submitting negative results. We discourage things like reproducibility projects. So we want to encourage them, we want to value them. And we didn't want to be just another journal that says we accept results that are negative, etc. We wanted to promote that. And that's one of the ways we did it. So results is one set of results or multiple sets of results that start to answer that question. Analysis can be you are analyzing your own results, or more fascinating, in my opinion, you're analyzing other people's results and combining them. And then impact paper is you're starting to answer that question that was posed. Now, another thing that, and by doing that, we're trying to kind of also give credit to all the people that sometimes get credit, but are always that middle author in the middle. So I was one of those middle authors in the middle because I was a data collector. That's what I did. I collected data on seaweed and data on diatoms and everything. I didn't get the very fantastic product at the end that was, treatment for cancer, but I was on the beach collecting those seaweeds and everything, and giving credit to those people is very important. Now, one of the ways that we want to value all of this is to make meaningful connections with all of these bits of science, and I'll show you at the end what that means and what that looks like. But we want to connect all of the pieces that are submitted against that question in a meaningful way. So if you land on a results paper, you can navigate backwards to the question that was posed, but you can navigate forwards to the analysis that came out of that question, that results, or to the impact paper, or an analysis that produced new results, and you want to understand where those results came from. And that is going to look like a connected map. which will show when we get more results and analysis submitted. But I have a sneaky preview for you. And this is what I was talking about. And I've already talked about the impact paper summarizing. One of the things that I did want, here's a sneaky preview. So here's our very first connected item. I know it looks very underwhelming, but you have no idea what this means to me. And for the IT people, they worked a lot on this. But basically, for each question, and this is one of our first questions, we get a connected item. And in this case, this is what we call community content. This was what I was talking about. We don't only accept peer-reviewed content, but we also accept what we call community content. So that's all of the other types of content that we tend to call it dismissively as gray literature or early outputs, but they're really meaningful and they can really contribute to that question. So all of those outputs are curated. So it's a little bit different than just putting everything on an archive, because they are curated against the question, but they're not peer-reviewed. So for this first question, we got our first community content, which happens to be a database, and the author is then going to submit results that feed off that database. And so you're going to have another little one, but they're being currently peer reviewed, so I can show you hopefully it will be accepted soon. So if you're interested in this model, by all means, go and visit the website. You can always contact me, and we do have a Twitter account, as long as Twitter is alive. Who knows about that? I did want to just summarize very quickly what the themes of the journals are and why they are those. It's because we knew that this was not going to work with all the communities, right? There's certain communities, and here I'm very much talking on a science side, because that's where I work, that are very happy with the journals that they have and the models that they have, and they don't want to change, and that's fine. So we needed to go out there and look for the communities that wanted to experiment and wanted something different. And where we're finding that, it seems to be two types of communities. One of them is the communities where they're all very interdisciplinary. We've talked about this on the previous panel. They're very, very interdisciplinary. They tend to be some themes that have an engineering component. So it's like a biologist that are working with engineers, for example, or architects that are working with biologists and engineers is another example. And I think it's just because those people are wanting to experiment, wanting to kind of try something else, and the current type of journal that is not working for them. And they also value other types of outputs that are not currently peer-reviewed. So such as things like, for example, in biodesign, they want to do a portfolio of images. So that's people that submit their material to museums, and they want that not to be just a catalog for a museum, but actually something that is citable. It's scientific in its kind of output. We are also having communities that are more on the policy side. So One Health is very much one of those, and in the future we're going to have others, possibly in the area of health, because they want to have policies at the end that actually contribute to some changes in the society, and they want to kind of speed up that process a little bit. And they're very interested on the impact papers on that way. And they're also really interested in publishing things that didn't work. So, protocols that didn't work, and they wanted to put it out there. I'll be very happy to answer more questions at the end. Thank you so much.
So my name is Rebecca Grant. I'm head of data and software publishing at F1000. I think I have too many slides, so I might skim through some of this. I thought it might be useful just to talk a little bit about the F1000 publishing model, although I'm speaking more specifically about data. And also just to touch on some of the themes that have come up already in the earlier sessions. So F1000 is a fully open access publisher. We publish, I think it's now 17 what we would call platforms, but it's the equivalent of a journal. We have partnerships with funders, including Wellcome, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the European Commission, to provide the infrastructure and editorial support for Diamond open access platforms. So that's thinking about Diamond as meaning a scenario where the author isn't paying an APC, not the scenario of having kind of voluntary editorial support. We're signatories of DORA, and none of the platforms have impact factors. And I think it's come up already, but what that does sometimes mean is that authors won't publish with us, unfortunately. And I suppose our kind of publishing model itself is a bit different to a standard journal, because what happens when you submit to us is that your manuscript goes through some pretty brief editorial checks just to make sure that you're following our ethical policies. And then immediately the article goes online. So then the peer review process happens completely openly. And as the peer reviewer submits their comments, the author will version the article publicly. So you can always go back and see what the original version looked like. You can always read the peer reviewer's reports, and it's also open to public comments. So if people are reading and they'd like to add a comment, they can do that. And then once the article's passed peer review, so been approved by 2 peer reviewers, it will get indexed in an indexer like PubMed or Scopus. So as I said, I am actually focusing more on research data sharing more than our model. And when I see research data, I'm thinking specifically of the data sets generated through research, or sometimes that are the input of someone's research that underpin the conclusions that they're usually reporting in a research article. So that's the kind of data that I'm talking about. So again, just to contextualize what's currently happening, I'm actually going to skip over this slide because I think I don't have enough time, but it's basically some stats around the extent to which a publisher or a journal can have an impact on an author's data sharing activity. So actually authors do report that they find that a journal or a publisher policy mandating data sharing is a key motivator for them doing it. So I think we actually have quite a lot of maybe leverage being publishers in kind of supporting activities around open science that might be desirable. But it might surprise you or not to learn that actually most journals and most publishers still don't really have open data sharing policies. So if you look across the academic publishing landscape, what you'll find most often is that a journal doesn't have a policy at all. So they just won't say anything in the instructions for authors about how data should be shared. Starting to change a bit, but still as new policies come in on journals, they will say something like, we expect you to share the data on reasonable request. So really that means the author is making a promise that if someone asks for the data at some point in the future, they say they'll definitely do that. And there's published studies showing the extent to which that does not happen. And then kind of less commonly, but again, starting to change a bit, you'll see journals with open data policies. So that's the policy that mandates open data sharing in a data repository, often with an open license. And that's what we have at F1000. So this is kind of a graphical representation of our open data guidelines, just to point out some of the things that we expect authors to do. The data, as I said, has to be in an open data repository, openly accessible. We also ask authors to draft a little data availability statement as part of the article, just explaining what the data is and where it can be found. We want to encourage reuse of this data that's been generated. So we only allow authors to publish if they've applied an open license to the data set. So they can either choose CC0 public domain dedication or CC BY attribution license. We encourage authors to make their data fair to the extent that they can. So that's kind of a set of principles around making data more reusable by others. And we also want to provide credit for data creators. So we expect all data sets that underpin the study to be cited in the body of the article and then added to the reference list. It looks somewhat similar to a standard bibliographic reference. And then because of the way our model works, with everything being public, as soon as the article is published on the platform and before peer review, we do expect our peer reviewers to take a look at the data as well. So they have access to it just like any reader does. And we have some guidance for peer reviewers on what they should be looking for when they assess the data. Okay, so now to get into the more innovative part of the session. So I thought I'd just give, again, a little bit of context about what data notes are, because that's what I'm mainly going to be talking about. So at F1000 platforms, there's a range of different article types you can publish, kind of moving somewhat in a similar way to what Research Directions is doing. So kind of atomizing the research article into constituent parts, maybe not going quite as far as Research Directions yet. So you can publish things like a methods article. If you generated software, you can publish a software tools article. We support registered reports. And there's two ways you can publish data notes with us. You can publish either a standard data note or a genome note article. And genome notes are just slightly different because the data is slightly different. So the kind of aim of a data note is to be a way for an author to maybe give a bit more, I suppose, prominence to the data that they've generated. They tend to be quite short. So often we would expect an author to write a research article and then maybe a data note as well if they'd like to. And I suppose, again, trying to speed up, the key thing about them is that we're not interested in your hypothesis, your analysis, your conclusions. We just want you to explain why you generated the data and what it was, how did you generate it, what is it, and ideally to tell us how somebody else could reuse it. So there's a big kind of focus on accessibility and reuse when it comes to a data note. Obviously, we already expect the data to be in a repository where it is openly accessible by others and openly licensed. So why would you write a data note as well? I suppose it's kind of a marriage of data in a repository and a research article, because they are peer reviewed and data in a repository almost never is. And then once published and peer reviewed, it will be indexed in the same indexing databases as a standard research article, and citable in the same way as a standard research article. So while data citation is still somewhat in its infancy, I think researchers are more likely to cite what looks more like a standard article, and data notes allow that. And like absolutely appropriate for the publication of something maybe that had null results or negative results, something small, something that you didn't publish as part of a research article, but you'd still like to maybe get it out there. So this is what data notes are. Now we're moving on to innovation, which is automated data note publishing. And I just think this project is really cool. So this is a collaboration we've been working on with the Wellcome Sanger Institute. So the Wellcome Sanger Institute are involved in the Tree of Life project. And it's a massive project to sequence the genomes of all animals, plants, and fungi in the British Isles and in Ireland. So they're like generating huge volumes of data. And they wanted to publish this. They're funded by Wellcome. They wanted to publish it on the platform that we provide the infrastructure for, which is Wellcome Open Research. And there's a couple of reasons they wanted to do this. So as I said, massive project. They're aiming to sequence about 70,000 genomes. And they really wanted to maximize both the access to these and the credit provided, especially because a lot of the samples were collected by citizen scientists. So all of this data is going into a sequencing repository. It's in the European Nucleotide Archive. But they also wanted to create this more accessible paper. It has images, it credits the people collecting the samples and everyone involved in the sequencing. And also they wanted to do this rapidly. So they've got these 70,000 genomes, sequencing all the time. And they wanted it published rapidly and peer-reviewed rapidly. So you can imagine this creates some challenges, I think particularly in a traditional publishing model, but also for us with a less traditional model. So a couple of challenges that are obvious, like writing thousands of articles, like 70,000 research articles or data notes, and then submitting thousands of articles for publication. So like, how do you get those into a journal submission system, which are like nightmarish usually? So this is kind of where the innovation comes in. We've set up a system where we're actually collecting metadata that's generated by the sequencing equipment in the labs in the Sanger Institute. And that gets pulled in with a little bit of human intervention to write a description of what the species was to create an article XML file. And then instead of going through the pain of a submission system and like entering your author details in your ORCID and so on, they have an automated pipeline directly into the Wellcome Open Research submission form. So they have an API, or we have an API, and they're feeding the XML articles directly into it. And then another obvious issue is the challenge of peer review. So these are peer reviewed. By standard, it would be at least 2 peer reviewers looking at every data note. And so what we've done to try and lessen the burden on our peer reviewers is to bring in something that we're calling, I think we're still calling it this, machine peer review. So basically collating the equivalent of a peer review report that's public alongside the article, that's demonstrating some of the metrics about quality and completeness of the genomes. So I guess to an extent, this is objective. You can look at the quality of an assembled genome and see, does it meet the benchmarks we'd expect? So we provide that alongside the article as a demonstration of quality of the sequenced genome. And it's also provided then to the peer reviewers. And we've been working to recruit a peer reviewer pool, focusing mainly on early career researchers, because these are relatively quick to review. We thought it might be an opportunity to do something like is quite quick, and obviously you get credited for it. And because we have the automated benchmarking report, and it's a very templated article type, like you don't need to spend an awful lot of time doing the peer review. It's kind of a sense check, and then you can say, this looks right. So opportunities in this, like I just think it's really cool. But like I think the obvious opportunities for the other kind of big data disciplines, so maybe something like high energy physics or anything where you can get kind of data and metadata coming directly from the lab. Obviously, it's reducing the article drafting burden and the submission burden on the authors, because a lot of it is automated, and it's also supporting the peer reviewers to make the peer review decisions quickly. And then I don't have it on the slide, and also I don't know if I should say it, but the APCs are like super low, like really, really low, insanely low, because it's like on a massive scale and it's automated, and our editorial team are not really so involved in it. So what next? This is just me speculating. This is something that I've been thinking about myself, and we're starting to do a bit of work on. And I guess, again, it kind of looks a little bit like what Research Directions is doing. So like looking at that atomization of research outputs. And to me, because I'm biased, I think the data set that comes out of a piece of research is almost central to what that research achieved. So like I think connecting things by having the data set in the center could be a really interesting way of navigating a piece of research. Often ahead of the research starting, the researcher will have a data management plan. Sometimes they're public, but you never see what happened next. You can't read them and check where the data go in the end. We're starting to make connections between data in repositories, data that's cited in a reference list, and data notes connected to research articles, but I think we could do a much better job of that, and it would be really interesting to see. Again, when Monica was talking about how exciting it is to see the connections, like you wouldn't believe the difficulty in connecting two articles on a journal. It's like basically impossible. So like making these multiple connections, I think to a reader is really helpful, and we need to think about, okay, how do we get over the kind of technical barriers? So I'll finish there just to say, reiterate, this is kind of what I was talking through, but to me still the starting point needs to be more expectation from journals that data is shared in the first place, because we get so many authors coming to us and they've never done this before, they've never been asked by anyone, and I think that's really foundational if we want to kind of move forward in data publishing. So thank you very much.
Hi, everyone. Okay, I'm Damian Pattinson. I'm Executive Director at eLife. I'm going to talk a bit about the changing model that eLife has been developing and announced recently. I sort of struggle to think how to introduce this talk, but in fact, Steve Russell, I thought, did a pretty good job earlier of highlighting the problem with the current system, this obsession with both impact factor and also just journal title in evaluating researchers. It really does feel that people care more about where you publish rather than what you publish, and that's obviously a significant leading to some very problematic behaviors in academic research and assessment. So the future, we think, looks something like this. The growth of preprints in the biomedical sciences, and I should say apologies to the humanists here, this is another biomedical talk, but we can say it'd be interesting to talk about how it might translate to other disciplines. But you can see that obviously there's been a huge rise in preprints over the last few years. The pandemic, I think, highlighted the importance of having work shared as early as possible, and the idea of waiting for months and months for papers to go through peer review is not practical when you have a full-blown outbreak. But that it shouldn't really be limited to outbreaks. I think, you know, that demonstrates the need for speed, but I think that should apply in all aspects of scientific research. And so there is an amazing opportunity now to really transform how we do share our findings as scientists, and preprints give us the ability to do that. Preprints are open, of course. They're immediate, and they're controlled by authors. The big advantage from my point of view is that the author is in control of the process. They choose the point at which they're ready to share their findings, but they're not trustworthy and they're not curated. Trustworthy in as far as they have not gone through much vetting, they haven't been peer reviewed, and so understanding how trustworthy they are is something that that is not immediately apparent to someone coming to the paper. And also, of course, as they grow, they become a bit of a fire hose, and it is hard to find things. So curation is also needed. So eLife, we really think that that's the role of the publisher in the future. If work is published online as a preprint, then the bit that publishers used to do is less important, and instead the bit the publishers should focus on is around trustworthiness and curation of the already published literature, and that's what we've been working on for the past few years. Oh, I was just going to briefly show this. So obviously this does happen already. You post a preprint and then you send it to a journal, and it gets published, and you could say there's the bit where you do trust and you do curation, but it takes forever. Here's just a random example. Apologies to PLOS Compile, but you can see here, can you read that? The paper was posted, the preprint was posted at the end of August 2020, and then over a year later, it appeared in PLOS Compile. So that's a year of no one having any feedback on that paper. So it's sitting on a preprint server with lots of people reading it, and yet having no sense of any kind of independent evaluation of it. And clearly that's not ideal. So eLife, we have been moving to a preprint first model for some years now. From July last year, we moved to a model where we would only review papers that have been posted as a preprint. So so when people would submit to us, if it hadn't already been posted as a preprint, we would do so on their behalf. And as a result, we've now posted over 2,000 full evaluations of preprints. They appear on bioRxiv or the preprint server that it was first posted to. And it also appears on the eLife website with the reviews attached. So that's, I think, progress towards this world where we are publishing first and then providing the review and curation afterwards. But we wanted to go further than that. So one thing that we saw was that people were much happier to post the reviews if the paper was accepted in the journal. And of course, that's completely understandable. If your paper gets rejected, you may feel that your reviews are going to, harm your chances of being published in a future journal. And really, that comes down to this sole problem of the journal being more important than the paper, and that it's more important to be able to get into somewhere than it is to actually have to have your own work publicly reviewed. So the model that we announced a few weeks ago aims at addressing that problem. So as of January next year, we will be posting all manuscripts with reviews and an eLife assessment. I'll talk more about eLife assessments in a sec on the eLife website. We will no longer make acceptance and rejection decisions. From at the end of January, everything that we send for review will be posted as a reviewed preprint on the eLife website. And then the author can decide the point at which they want to turn that into a formal version of record. So essentially, we will post a reviewed preprint. We will have the assessment that shows what we think of the value and the quality of the paper. But the point at which that gets turned into a version of record is up to the author. So the author can do revisions, we will re-review, we will post an updated assessment, and then if the author's happy, they will then post a version of record, which then gets indexed in PubMed and Web of Science and so on. So essentially, it's putting the control of that process into the hands of the author. And as a result, we'll actually reduce the price of our of this process as well. So previously it was $3,000, we're reducing it to $2,000, and that's to reflect the fact that we will basically be posting more papers on the eLife website because we'll be charging authors who get sent for review rather than only the ones we accept. So we're able to do this more cheaply than the current system. Here's the process. I won't go into it in too much detail, but essentially, as I said, you submit, you go through the peer review process as it exists now in terms of a kind of consultation with the editors and the reviewers. We'll publish the reviewed preprint on the eLife website. The author is then allowed to make revisions based on those reviews and the feedback. Once they do so, we will then re-review and we will update our assessment. And then at any point, the author can post the version of record. So really, a sort of full version of this publish, review, curate model, as we call it. Essentially, you start with the publication, the review all happens online, and then the curation happens afterwards. Here is an example of a reviewed preprint. It looks pretty much like an eLife paper, really. It has a few key differences. First of all, you can see in the top right that we're labeling it as a reviewed preprint as opposed to a version of record to indicate the status that it's at. And then the further down, you can see the peer review timeline that shows where it is in the process. And crucially, we have this eLife assessment. And this is the thing that applies the curation to the whole process. So essentially, you have a way of talking about the paper that will clearly sort of demarcate the quality of both the methods and also sort of the impact of the findings. We're using a structured vocabulary. You can see that there are some slight, how clear that is, but there are some bold words there. So landmark describes the significance of the paper. The methodology is exceptional to describe the methodology. So all of a sudden, instead of just having a single journal title in which to assign the value of the paper, so, you know, published in Nature, instead you have a nuanced assessment of the work, which provides context. It's a sort of summation of the reviews that provides context. It also provides these terms that assign significance and quality of methods. So you have an entirely new kind of axis on which you're evaluating research. This is the thing that we want to replace journal title with. Instead of having one journal title as the way in which you decide if this paper is any good, instead you have a detailed assessment that anyone can read and will give you a much more richer, more nuanced assessment of the piece of work itself. So as I said, we're now looking at the quality of the work rather than the journal that it's published in. This is just briefly the vocabulary that we're using. It's, you know, it is graded. We're trying to not make it too much of a grading system, and we're not going to kind of tag it so that you can you know, so the idea is that this is just a kind of way of talking about the papers, but done in a consistent and controlled way. So it starts with landmark, as in, you know, the really big findings, and then kind of other levels of value and strength of evidence. So you can have a varying strength of evidence. So you can imagine a paper may go through after submission, it would receive an evaluation that says that the methods are solid. It's then in the author's interest to want to revise it and maybe improve the methodology to get it to a different level. So so that's where the kind of incentive comes to actually revise and resubmit. I just thought I'd talk about the reaction because it's been really interesting how many people noticed this. We were sort of, you know, we knew it was quite a big deal. eLife has been going for 10 years. We've established quite a clear reputation for and a prestige. And the reaction was extraordinary in as far as people did genuinely see the kind of that this is a sort of revolutionary new way of assessing research. Not all of it was positive. We got a lot of pushback from people. As I said in my question earlier, there was definitely a sense that the more senior people were more concerned over it, and especially they would always say, "Well, my postdocs aren't going to be able to use this because it has problems." It doesn't solve the problem of them having to be assessed on where they publish. And that's what we'll do, and I'll talk about that in a second. But overall, it has been it's been extraordinary how widely it's been discussed, how much you know, the feeling was that this is you know, has the potential to be kind of revolutionary. So it's been really remarkable to see the level of interest in it. A lot of people have said, "Why are you burning down eLife? Why are you getting rid of this journal that was you know, was really established and prestigious?" And the answer is, we can't be a prestigious publication and say that the problem with the system is prestigious publications. So we have to change. And so this is our attempt of doing that. We're very lucky. We have funding from HHMI and from Wellcome and others. And that allows us to do these sorts of, take these bigger risks that other publishers would ever do. So that's why we've gone with eLife. That's why we didn't launch a new journal or do this in a sort of more contained way. We wanted to demonstrate that this is a genuinely new and focused direction of travel for us. I just want to say the criticism or the concern that we often receive is around people saying my postdocs aren't going to be able to get evaluated. So we started receiving these letters of support. HHMI issued a strong letter of support recently. Wellcome have tweeted it so far. We're going to get something more from them in the coming days. But other funders are coming on board, such as Gates. Chen, Coalition S, Wallenberg, and more to follow. We're also talking to institutions, and we'll have a kind of list of signatories of institutions who also support this. Everyone we speak to is extremely supportive. Funders and institutions want to see change. They feel that this is a blueprint for a different way of doing publishing. So the support has been very, very positive, but we do need to express that to the author community to make clear that this is something that will benefit them and benefit science more generally. And I will stop there, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I'm going to use my chair's privilege actually to ask the first question, if that's okay. So we've heard in the previous session about Dora, kind of the downsides of brands and prestige and that kind of stuff. But I'm interested in to what extent the innovations you describe here are kind of buoyed or enabled by the brands that you all sort of represent. Is branding a dirty word, or is it actually something that's helpful?
Do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So it depends how you define brand, I guess. If you mean journal title, then yes, it is probably a bit of a dirty word, and I think it is something we need to move away from. But it certainly, I think we wouldn't have had the reaction that we got had it not been us doing it. You know, 10 years of building up a brand does allow for innovation to have more impact, I'd say. And so I hope that the work we've done in that regard does, you know, allow us to kind of take advantage of the positive sides of brand, but to do so in a way that is genuinely disruptive and sort of risk taking rather than just trying to kind of grow our business. So I guess that would be the.
Yeah, I mean, I think at Cambridge University Press, and I do have some colleagues in the audience, so don't tell this back at home. But I think it's more that we are using research directions to make Cambridge University Press brand show that we can be innovative and we can be disruptive and we can be experimental at the press, especially in the science, rather than the opposite, because the press is seen as traditional, maybe more social sciences, maybe more humanities. So I think here we're kind of using the research directions brand to kind of show that we can experiment at Cambridge University Press rather than the opposite. Having said that, I think it's also the fact that we don't have, I'm not breaking anything, right? I'm starting something from scratch. I think that gave me a little bit of liberty, or gave us a little bit of liberty on trying something out.
Does F1000 have a prestigious brand? I don't know if it has a lot of recognition, but I suppose for anyone who knew F1000, it kind of has a reputation for being a bit, certainly when it was launched, it was quite disruptive, I suppose, and quite unique. And then I think having the partners that we do, so like the European Commission and their Horizon 2020 grantees publishing on Open Research Europe, and Wellcome, like it does give you a bit of scope. You can say like the European Commission like this way of doing things. So like I think if we're looking to convince someone, then it's either potential authors or maybe new partners. So it can be good to point to the funders who are already on board. But yeah, I think that question maybe wasn't so much for me. Leveraging F1000.
So I really like most of what the new direction at eLife, and I think it's the way that we need. I mean, APCs we have to get rid of one way or other, but put that to one side. One thing I really don't understand is this business about the assessment, eLife assessment. To my mind, that's not an assessment of the research as it is. That's kind of eLife's judgment about what its impact will be. You know, will it be a landmark thing or? But I don't really see why that's a valuable thing for eLife to contribute. I think that what you're introducing there is a sort of another kind of thing that publishers or that authors rather will sort of compete for.
Yeah.
And I really don't see why it was necessary.
That's a really great point. I agree. I think most authors would say that a big reason that you want to the whole journal ecosystem is based on that premise. It's about predicting future impacts. And I think what's, the reason that you want to get into a prestigious journal is because that's saying that this work is going to be impactful in the future. So I agree, it's not, it's never going to be a perfect metric, but I think it's kind of replacing what already happens in the journal ecosystem. So the question is, yeah, should we only endorse kind of best practices and say we shouldn't make any kind of future judgments on a paper, we just need to wait to see how it pans out? Maybe. One thing we have talked about is re-evaluating in the future, going back to that assessment and changing it after a year or two or something. I think that's an interesting thing that could happen. But overall, we feel the reason that we needed the assessments is that we did need an alternative to journal target. I don't think it's enough to just say reviewers, for one thing, it's not enough to ask everyone to read all the reviews, because we know they won't do that. So you do need some kind of shorthand, and this is a better shorthand than the journal ecosystem. But I do agree that it's it's always going to be a shorthand and therefore never fully accurate.
So actually that leads into my question about does the assessment process work in reverse? So if you have a version of record, can you retract the assessment? Do you downgrade the assessment? Like how does that work in terms of readers encountering that content and wanting to understand if there's an issue with it or not, or whether it still stands?
As in, so after a period of time, the problems are identified with the paper that weren't picked up at peer review. Yeah, again, that's so certainly we'll continue to correct and retract papers as we do now. Would we reevaluate? I mean, actually, that's a really interesting question. I mean, that wasn't our intention, but actually, there's no reason why we couldn't. We're deliberately trying to be not too prescriptive on this. We think it's important to have vocabulary that is consistent, and that's why we have those control terms that I mentioned. But we also want to kind of just move away from any kind of notion of a sort of set stable thing. It's hard to do both. So basically what we're doing is trying to give people what we think they need for now and what they're sort of looking for in terms of having a stable assessment. But yeah, maybe in time that is something we can consider. So yeah, interesting.
Any other questions? Yep.
Hi all, thanks for being here in this really interesting discussion. So my question is mostly aimed at Damian. Sorry guys, it's just really exciting, but it might also apply to F1000. So I come to this as a fan of eLife, as a lover of these things. So please know that it's just a question. But I guess we're having this conversation, this conference, this announcement, all sort of in the context of this kind of like years-long conversation that's been going on about like gatekeeping in both academic and like other scholarly contexts, and then like more specifically like this month with like the whole Muskification of Twitter. And like journalists on Twitter are like having a meltdown collectively about the destruction of the verification system, which is sort of supposed to be this like gatekeeping, anti-gatekeeping thing. At least that's what we're being told, because they're worried about losing their authority over sort of things that are not information that might not be reflecting journalistic integrity and practice. And I just sort of can't help but see a little bit of a potential parallel in our space. Like I'd like to think that we're better than that here, but if anybody's worked in academia in North America, they will know that maybe we aren't. And yeah, so I just wanted to know if like maybe that was part of the conversation when you're sort of like coming up with this model, and maybe the others could also might have something to add on that.
So if the question is, like if burning, we're not changing we're not changing our process. So we're not, for example, saying peer reviews a mess, we're just going to let the crowd decide, which some people doing, that's a model that is being tossed around, that any sort of coordinated review is always going to be biased and problematic, therefore we won't do it. What we're trying to do is maintain the existing structure of peer review. So we still have our consultative process, which still invites in experts as we've always done. The only thing we're changing is the output. So rather than it being it's in or out of a journal, it's just a more nuanced assessment. So that's kind of the change. I mean, it's not that dramatic when you put it in those terms. I know the sort of implications are, and it sort of does fundamentally change what people think of when they think of publishing. But we're hoping that there is enough there that is relatable and the same, that it's not going to be seen as a kind of full-on buskification, which is a great word, should use more. But yeah,
Thanks.
I agree. I have always kind of compared the two industries. I mean, there's a lot of parallels in the two industries, and to be honest with you, I think there is fear that we should fear what happened with journals, you know, and the news, that it happens in academia. I don't think, you know, not having any gatekeepers is the way to go, to be honest with you. I mean, that gives us fake news, whatever your definition of fake news is, and it gives us, you know, not an establishment of some kind of agreement of what our reality is. And can you imagine that in academia? I mean, it's scary, right? So I think there is definitely a role for curation. There's definitely a role for peer review. It's just about being transparent on what we are peer reviewing and why we are making those decisions. So with any of the outputs in research directions, we are doing open peer review. And by that, I mean, we are publishing the reports, and hopefully people will sign those reports. Some people still are a little bit afraid of signing those reports for good reasons and for bad reasons, but we are encouraging people to sign those reports, but at least we are publishing the reports. With results and analysis, we're guiding people a little bit through that review process. So it's not just, as I still have people saying, I don't think this is novel. That's like, I don't care if you think it's novel. Is it good science? Is it responding to the question? Then we will publish it. So we have that transparency there. And with the non-peer reviewed content, there still has to be some kind of curation. Because, for example, one of the journals that we publish is quantum technology. And I don't know, it's not my area, but there's a lot of theories about quantum out there, and some of them are not scientific. And so, you know, there still has to be some kind of curation of, is this scientific? Is this answering the question that we pose? Or is it just because you had a dream about quantum? To be honest, it just kind of ends up there. But, you know, I think there has to be some kind of curation, and it's just about being transparent, so that if there are, and there will always be bias, that at least those bias are visible.
You'd be surprised how many papers get submitted it is about someone's dream, literally. But I think, like, I don't want to speak too much from like an editorial perspective, because that's not really the type of work that I do. But like, I think I completely agree with what Monica's saying about transparency, and that's why I'm a real advocate for open data. Because to me, if you can see what was generated and then read what somebody claims to have proven, like, you've got all the information in front of you, and then of course, you can read the peer review reports, you can read how the author responded, so they'll write a little response, and you can see that too, and the versions. I suppose my only hesitancy with that kind of model is the amount of time it takes you to wade through, like, okay, what actually happened with this paper? How did it start and how did it end? And I can't remember who was saying it earlier, but like the idea of having a marked up paper where you could see like all the revisions is amazing, but also a nightmare. So
this is for Rebecca. So I'm really curious to know what the peer review process is of the data note. So is it the note itself, like the text, or is it the underlying data? And if it is the underlying data as well, the data set, to what extent and how is that peer reviewed?
Sure. So it's actually the same process whether you're publishing a data note and data or a research article and data. So we give the same guidance to the peer reviewers. So obviously have a look at the structure of the data note, see does everything seem to be filled in each section as you'd expect. Have they included like information on like any validation, any limitations to the study and so on, more like a standard peer review. And then we have some kind of high level guidance around the review of the data as well. So at the minimum, go to the repository, see, can you find it? Is it well described? Can you access it? Does it seem to be what the author said it was? Like the extent to which someone, like I would say it is rare or never that somebody would kind of reproduce something based on the data. Like we wouldn't expect a peer reviewer to go that far. But once they've kind of ticked off our questions about what they found when they access the data and how it appears to be formatted and its reusability, it's up to them how much further they go. So
that's interesting, because that's the extent to what I assume some discipline-specific repositories would go to, and certainly institutional repositories. Apollo, for example, that's actually what we do with Apollo with the data sets. We review them actually almost exactly as what you've just described before we approve them into the repository. And general purpose repositories, I mean, not much of that happens at all, if it does. So,
yeah,
so I'm just interested what you said before. What is the difference between a data set in a repository and a data node? So I'm thinking of a data set in a repository that's very well described versus a data node that is also described. It's the credit of the publication that you get with the data node. To me, that's the only difference.
Yeah, I think so. Many repositories, especially generalists, won't look at the data at all. There's no human intervention. The disciplinary repositories are better, and institutional as well. So I suppose I'm also from a data repository background more than publishing. And when I look at the data node article, I was actually writing a promotional one-page document about why would you publish one. And I went back to the publishing team and I was like, why do people publish them? And it's all those incentives we talked about earlier. So like indexing in Scopus, having a citable article that people want to cite, and people are much more likely still to cite at other publishers, I think more than F1000, because we mandate data citation if the data is in a repository, but at other publishers, not so much. So like everything around raising the profile, the citation, the citability, the indexing are the reasons that I think an author would choose to publish this way if they've already put the data into a data repository.
Well, actually, I might hand the mic on because you kind of asked a very similar question to me. Well, so Rebecca, so years ago, I know there was a lot of conversations with some of the real big community databases, like the model organism databases that are totally central to research fields, in some ways at least as important as the journals really for their day-to-day workings. So would you say that what you're exploring a way for, and some of these databases were like looking for ways to like secure their financial future? You know, they were, and publishing, you know, giving people credit for putting data in or annotating it was, you know, potentially part of their like grant renewals and business models. Would you say that you're developing a system to give people credit for database annotation?
I'm not sure that I fully understand the question. Do you mean like by having data notes we're like removing the credit that a repository gets for kind of doing a similar kind of piece of work? Is that what you mean?
Well, so if there's a model organism database, you know, genetics, cell lines, bunches and bunches of whole totally different stuff about a particular organism, for example, those databases need data to go in, and traditionally the journal article point to that. But really what needs to happen, and for the researchers to get credit, is that they put the data in and it's well annotated in the database, and that's what they get rewarded for, rather than something in a journal.
Yeah, so all of the data associated with the data note still needs to be in a data repository. And if people reuse a data set from a data repository, they should be citing the data in the data repository, not going out looking for a research article that cited it and citing that. And we do enforce that in our reference list. But like, I think kind of similar to the last question, like the reasons that authors would choose to do both are, I think, about raising the profile in a way that's more currently acceptable in the scholarly kind of credit way of thinking about things. Like data citations, I think, do not have the value or even the ability to track that more standard citations and reference lists do. So there's still a value in having both, and we would always expect both to be in place. So you can't publish with us if the data is not in a repository, regardless of what kind of article you're publishing.
Cool, I think that's all we have time for. So thank you very much to the panelists, and leave it